Hey guys, Thrasher here, and we're 2 days out from the Dragon Ball Legends Las Vegas Showdown. We have a list of the actual competitors, and we have some information about them. So we're going to take a look at the Las Vegas Showdown breakdown and see what we can learn from it. Let's talk about it right now. Okay, so first up, as you can see right here, we have the actual tournament bracket. This is how it's going to be seeded. I am going to mention something about the seeding in just a second, but what we'll see is this is a double elimination tournament. So this is the winner's bracket, and then if we go down here and click this, there's actually a loser's bracket. So the first thing we want to mention here is they do not understand how to seed a tournament. So what you'll see here is the Asian 1 seed is against the American 1 seed, the Japanese 1 seed is against the European and African 1 seed, and you have all of the top seeds are against each other, and then all of the bottom seeds are against each other. The reason that this is terrible seeding design is because you're going to have really good matches right here where you have the best against the best, the worst against the worst, and then as you go on, you're going to have the best against the middle-ish worst, and then you're going to have the best against the absolute worst down here, and then you're not going to have another good match until the best two up here. One of them gets knocked down way down here, and then you have a good match in the grand final, hopefully. But the way that this is supposed to work is you have the best against the worst, and then the second best against the second worst, so that way the matches actually get closer and more exciting as you get further and further down the bracket, whereas we're going to have the opposite. We're going to have probably a very good first round match, and then the rest of these matches are going to be garbage until hopefully the grand final is good again, where we probably see one of these matches up top ends up being a rematch. Now, with that being said, we do have the list of competitors, and we could plug them in right here if we wanted to. I don't think we need to plug them in for this video. If you want to do that, you can. Make sure you grab this link up here. It's dble-coverage.bn. This whole thing, you can see it. I'll link it in the actual description as well, so if you want to go here, you can check it out. It's up top. You want to go to player introductions to see the players, which we're going to look at in just a second. So now that we have a good understanding, or at least a base understanding of how these are going to be seeded out, let's actually look at some of the characters. So they have a full list of all the characters here. We have the 5 American characters, and we can go through them in just a second. We have the Japanese characters, the European and African characters, there's 5 of those, and then we have the other Asian characters that are non-Japanese. Now, rather than going through these one at a time, someone on the Dragon Ball Legends Reddit was kind enough to sort of aggregate this data for us. Otherwise, it would take a long time to go through here one by one, and here is his actual aggregation. Let me zoom out real quick just so you can see the whole thing, and then we're going to zoom in and walk through these one at a time to kind of give you an idea of how these different players are going to play the game, how good they actually are, what they've done in the past. And then he did actually leave a couple key things out that are pretty important, so we'll go back to the player profiles here in just a second and point those out. So the first thing we should do is go through America. We see the American players are Daryl, Whirl Kick, Michael C, Diego, and SMG. So Daryl plays Future, 2 tanks, offensive. Now, the key here, he says no stats. In a minute, we're going to see that as we're going through some of these characters, they have stats for where they've ranked. So in previous seasons, maybe they've been number 1 in the world, maybe they've been number 3. You'll see those things, and then the actual stats that he's talking about is the number of wins. So you're going to see those 2 things in any area where it's actually been posted, or he's done some other research somewhere else to find that. So one thing you're going to notice about all of these American players is they're pretty much unknowns. We don't really have any information on how good they actually are. One last thing I want to point out here, I'm not going to read through these because you can read them yourself, and I will make sure to post a link to his thread in the Reddit. One thing I want to mention is even though these guys say they play casually, that's not really what they mean. So let's go and look at Whirl Kick real quick, and we're going to find Whirl Kick right here. And essentially, when they go through this questionnaire and they respond with how they play, your PvP battle style is casual. He's just trying to play it off cool. He's trying to be humble. But the truth is, anyone that made this tournament plays constantly. He's not a casual player. He's obviously very competitive, and he's trying to win. So let's jump back over here. I just want to make sure that you're, taking that with a grain of salt when it says plays casual. They don't play casual. They're all very competitive players. Now, the real issue here is most of these players are unknown. I have actually seen Diego once or twice. I want to say that Diego was actually in one of the Reddit tournaments at one point, but I might be wrong. I've definitely played against him, and he stomped me into the ground. Now, to be fair, I'm not an amazing player. I'm a top 10,000 player, but I'm nowhere near being able to play at the level that these guys play in this tournament. So just keep that in mind. None of these guys have any real information that would make you say, oh, they're probably going to win. There's a few players that I thought had a good chance, and they just didn't make it. I thought maybe Bebop would get into the tournament. He didn't. I thought maybe Supreme Karma would. He didn't. So that's unfortunate. Let's scroll down here and talk about these guys right here. So as you'll notice, he says Japan, aka the Golden Boys. These are the three that if you are going to put some medallions and spread them around, I highly recommend that you put at least one medallion on all three of the Japanese players. So let's actually go through some of their accolades real quick. So the number 1 seed is Millpool. I have played against Millpool before, and he destroyed me. I don't think I actually even touched him. I think I've only played him twice that I remember, and he just wiped the floor with me. Most people think that if you are going to put all your medallions on one person, your safest bet is Millpool. But before we do that, I do want to point something out about his actual profile or his questionnaire in just a second. So first off, he was number 1 in Season 21. He plays generally the Female Warriors team and the Sun family. He has an adaptive playstyle, which obviously he has to have an adaptive playstyle. To be one of the best players, you have to be able to adapt to your opponent, and then very high hopes. So he's saying that extremely high hopes that this player is going to win. There are a lot of people that are assuming Millpool is going to win, but there's something that we need to factor in here. So let's go back over to this area and back out of here, and let's go find Millpool's actual profile. There's something that he points out here near the bottom, which could actually be very huge. As we scroll down, we're going to notice expectations for the tournament. My fingers don't work as I wish them to when I'm nervous, so I will take this easy. So essentially what he's saying is he's one of those people that, while he's very competitive and he's a good player at the game, he's someone that he believes cracks under the pressure. Now, we don't know if that's true or not, but here's something to figure out is these players, when they're playing the game, they're not generally under the spotlight. You know, maybe they're in a tournament, but they're at their home. They're somewhere where they feel safe and they feel comfortable. He's going to be in Las Vegas. There's going to be tons of people watching him. There's going to be lights on him. So it's very possible that he starts getting nervous. And the key thing here is he says he starts making lots of mistakes when he's nervous. So that's just something to factor in. I think there's still a very good chance that he comes through and wins this tournament. But when you mention that, hey, when I'm in a situation where I get nervous, I don't play very well, and you're putting someone in a situation where they're going to be in front of tons of eyes and they know it, there's a good chance he does get nervous. So just factor that in. Let's go back over here and let's talk about Chicken 319. So he was ranked number 3 in the world once, ranked in the top 10 5 times. He plays Future and Regen. And the next part here where it says watch Rising Rush closely, he essentially just says in the questionnaire that he's always paying attention to make sure he doesn't get Rising Rushed by his opponent. I think that's true for everyone, so we can kind of factor that out. Another very high hopes player. So I've never actually seen any real content from Chicken 319, but lots of people on the Reddit and lots of people that I've talked to have said he's played against Bebop, he's played against Supreme Caramel, and he in most cases wins those matches, at least from the matches they've seen. But then let's go down to Masakatsu. So Masakatsu actually has videos on YouTube that you can check out. I'll see if I can find a link to it and throw it in the description as well, where he actually plays against Bebop, who is a well-known player. We all know he's very good. He replaced a disqualified player. He's ranked 3rd in the world 3 times total. He plays Future, and then he's good at predicting the opponent's playstyle, which is essentially the adaptive thing that I talked about before. If you watch the video of Masakatsu versus Bebop, he does a pretty good job of tearing Bebop up. He beats Bebop pretty badly in those videos. Now, I don't know if they've played more outside of those videos, and maybe Bebop has won a few, but in those, they were pretty lopsided. He did quite some work on Bebop. So let's go ahead and move down into Europe. But like I said, if you're going to just throw some tokens around and, you know, just spread it out among 7 people, I highly recommend putting at least one on all 3 of the Japanese players, as they all have a very good chance of actually winning this tournament. The only real issue is because there's only 3 players and they have seeded the tournament so awkwardly where all of the top seeds are next to each other. The Japanese guys are all going to have to play each other fairly early on. So there's a good chance that maybe the number 2 and 3 ranked Japanese players end up knocking each other out as they move down into the bottom seeds and then just into the losers bracket, and then something happens with maybe Millpool where maybe he gets nervous and doesn't play to his full potential. And all of these players are so skilled that even playing at 95% of your full potential is not going to be good enough to win this tournament. So just keep that in mind. There's not a guarantee that the Japanese players will win just because the seeding in this tournament is very awkward. Now let's go ahead and move down to Europe and Africa. So I actually don't have any extra information about the European and African players outside of essentially what's on this list. So one thing you'll notice is that Muten does run the female warrior team, and that can be powerful if he happens to run into possibly a Sun family team. But one thing you'll notice here is not a lot of people are actually running the Sun family team. Maybe that's just because this data is coming from previous seasons where there really wasn't a Sun family team. But if you happen to run a female warrior team and you happen to have Chi-Chi on your team, you can really punish a Sun family team if you get them into the right combo with Chi-Chi. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then let's move on to Nakale 08. He's confident, plays future mostly. He's a defensive player. So he plays the future team. He's a defensive player. He has Zamasu, which is going to heal the team a lot. The one thing you want to keep in mind about very defensive players is if you're ultra defensive to a point where it's predictable how you're going to be so defensive, that is very punishable at a high level of play. So just keep that in mind. And then Ichizoku. He plays the female warriors. He has a mixture of defensive and offensive combat styles, which is more of what you want. You don't want someone who's super defensive or someone who's super aggressive. You want someone who really adapts. You'll notice that they said that a lot for the Japanese and North American players, is that they're adaptive. They predict what the opponent's going to do. It's not that they're a defensive style and then, you know, they slightly adapt as they need. You want to have both skill sets so that you can switch as needed depending on who your opponent is. And then Saru and Heart LJ, I think one of the key things to mention here is Saru himself mentions that he plays Super Saiyans and Sagas from the Movies characters, which is not the most common out of a lot of the things that you're going to see as the teams that are run by other players, and he's extremely offensive, which, as I said before, can be a bit of an issue if you run into someone who understands how to punish that. And then Hard LJ plays the future team, so he's going to be able to heal himself as Zamasu. He's got the ability to tank a Rising Rush if he needs to. I don't think we're going to see a ton of Rising Rushes actually get hit in this tournament. I think Rising Rushes will more be set up for extra combos, as that's generally what you see in very high levels of play, although it is possible we will see a few Rising Rushes that may change the tide of a battle. And then not a lot of time spent on practice. Here's the thing. Anyone in this list that says they don't spend a lot of time on practice, they're like, oh, I only spend 8 hours a day practicing. There's no way that you could even make this list if you're not playing at least 4 hours a day. There's no way. Like, you couldn't even qualify for this. So that kind of comment right there where they say they don't spend a lot of time practicing, completely discount that. So then let's go down here and let's move into Asia and other Oceania. So this is including Australia. And one thing I want to note here, there is a phrase on this for Wallace that's actually been grayed out, and that's simply because it's against YouTube's terms of service. If I put it on here, I think there's a good chance that the video will either get pulled down, demonetized, other stuff like that. So if you want to check out what that actually says, feel free to go to the description and click the link to the Reddit post. But it's nothing that really adds value. So Shenyao and all of these three actually have lists of how many wins they have. So Shenyao has 4,235 wins, which to me seems kind of low. That's not crazy as far as some of these other players. So he plays future, he plays regen, he has a defensive play style, and I don't think there's too much more to say there. We don't have a ton of stats on him outside of his actual number of wins. If we look at Tamasai, he has about 25% more wins, pretty close to that. He's got 5,578, so he does play more than Shenyao has or does at the moment. He plays future, and then here's a big thing to notice for him. He says almost guaranteed wins when in control, very bad at turnaround. So essentially, he's a very good front runner. That's generally what you call it in sports. If he's in the lead, he's going to tear it up. He's going to play, at least he believes he's going to play beautifully. If he starts to fall behind, he loses confidence, and it's very hard for him to turn it back into a win. So if you get into a situation where he plays someone who's fairly aggressive and that person happens to get an early lead, there's a good chance that he's not going to be able to pull the win out in that situation. But if he plays against someone who's a little more defensive, or someone who, for whatever reason, is a slower starter, and Thomas starts to get out into an early lead, he'll feel very confident, and there's a good chance he's actually going to win that match. So keep that in mind. And then the last one is Wallace. So it seems like out of these three, even though Wallace is ranked as the 3rd seed, he probably has the best chance to perform well in this tournament. There's actually a couple reasons for that. One, he's got almost 11,000 wins. He's closing in on that. He's done 10 seasons in a row where he's at over 10,000 RP, which is very good. And then the other huge thing is because he's a 3rd seed, he's going to be at almost the bottom of the bracket, which means that he's going to get to maybe the 3rd or 4th round before he has to run into a 1 seed. So there's a good chance that he goes very far without being extremely tested. Now, you're going to be tested no matter what. These are all amazing players, but if you're tested to 98% of your mental capability versus 100%, that means that you've got a little bit left in the tank when you actually get to that final match. As someone who has played in some semi-pro tournaments, I can tell you right now that stuff does factor in. There is mental fatigue, even if you're only playing for a couple hours. So if you get a couple slightly easier matches early on, as opposed to some of these 1 seeds who are going to be playing absolute killers at the very beginning, you have a good chance to kind of mentally rest yourself at least a little bit. And if you have some type of special technique that you don't really show off, and you've got some type of pocket strat that someone hasn't seen before, you can save that till a couple rounds in when you actually start hitting the 1 seeds. if that's something that you want to do. So I think Wallace, out of everyone here who is not a 1 seed, probably has the best chance and is in the best position to make a very long run into this. So if you were to ask me, I would say definitely put 1 medallion on 3 of the Japanese players. So each of the 3 Japanese players, put 1 on Wallace, and then the rest, it's going to kind of depend on how you're feeling, what you want to go after, but I think those 4 are probably the safest bets for your medallion plays. So let's go ahead and zoom out one last time and point that out. So we've got Milkpool, Chicken, Masakatsu, and then Wallace are the 4 that I would probably put a medallion on, and then the rest, it's really going to depend on your preferences. So you go after what you want to go after. I think those are the safest bet. And that's pretty much it for this video. You guys let me know who you think after reading this and what you know about these players, or maybe you don't know anything about these players, but you've only read this. Who do you think is going to win the tournament? Throw that down below. I'd like to see your predictions, and then we can look at them later to see who was right, who was wrong. And if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.